you like to say something first, John, before we start? We just go straight into the questions.
Well, I just want to thank you all for coming. I mean, the internet has been an amazing thing for Alton Towers, and what always intrigues me is, whereas an awful lot of forums not connected with theme parks get very waspish and bitter and twisted, all of you guys are really so good and positive and nice and pleasant, and that's why I always enjoy coming and meeting you, because you really do enjoy what Alton Towers creates. I was about to say what we create, but of course, as you know, I'm now retired, so I don't have any influence here anymore, and it's not really we anymore. It used to be, back sort of just a few years ago, and certainly going back 20, 25 years. But thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you for all the goodwill that is generated on the internet, and I, for one, and particularly the response that I've had to my book. I was a bit reticent about publishing it. People said, "Oh, you really should," and the positive reviews that it's had have been extremely humbling to me, and I just want to thank everybody here for the goodwill that you generate. So yeah, that's all. Who has never been to one of these events before? Who is? Oh well, there's a lot of people. Well, keep coming. As you probably realised today, by joining events like this, you get to meet other people who are enthusiasts. You get an insight into the way things work. In the entertainment business, we don't ram down people's throats backstage, behind the scenes tours and that sort of thing, because entertainment is entertainment, and the magic is and mystery is part of it. But by joining groups like this, it'll give you an insight into how we do things, and it's for that reason I'm not exactly going to do I'm not going to do a presentation. I'm just going to throw the questions open, and if you've got any questions you'd like to ask, then I'm very happy to answer them. So shall we get started?
Yeah, we might just share one. Anybody want to start the questions? First hand, right here.
Just so I don't ask it, what question do you ask the most often?
That's dead easy. It's usually from the roller coaster groups, and it's when you're going to build a Woody. so that's a dead easy question to answer.
Next question. Okay.
Just a really general question. When you hear about rides being built, and obviously you've got a part in that, the theme parks have a part in that, and then in Nemesis, B&M and Stengel, just what part does each sort of component play? Because obviously Alton Towers don't just go build us a ride in that space, and you never really get that explained out, so I was just wondering like the process.
That's a really good question. That's a very good question indeed. As you appreciate, we've probably got more B&M rides here than most parks in the world. It all started with Nemesis. As you probably know, way back in, it was about 92, I guess, we were looking for a new ride for Alton Towers. We just built the Vampire at Chessington 2 years previously. We had a good relationship with Aerodynamics, and we were looking for something unique. Jeffrey Thompson at Blackpool Pleasure Beach was a very good friend of mine, and he told me that they were planning the biggest, highest roller coaster in the world at Blackpool. We were scheduled to build something pretty big here, but as you obviously understand, we cannot build big, high rides here. We cannot build anything that goes above treetop height. We can't build anything that can be seen from outside the park. That's an enormous restriction that's placed upon Alton Towers. And let's face it, roller coasters tend to be big and high and fairly obtrusive. And so we had to think outside the box. And a lot of people say that because we had to think outside the box, that's why we created what at the time was arguably one of the best rides in the world. Some people still say that it still is one of the best rides in the world. So we went to Arrow and we said, right, what can you provide us with that doesn't require a tremendous amount of height? And they had just been trying to develop the pipeline coaster, which basically, instead of running up on top of the track or underneath the track, ran between the tracks. And I felt that this might be a good ride for Alton Towers. When I looked at photographs that they mocked up of the prototype, the vehicles were sort of bullet-shaped. They looked a bit like missiles. And we came up with the idea of creating a rather sinister sort of area that was kind of a government secret weapon, kind of nuclear whatever thing. We decided that we would call the ride the Secret Weapon, and it would be themed on something rather sinister that nobody ever really got to the bottom of quite what it was. And so the first layout that I did on the drawing, I put SW1. Now this will mean quite a lot to a lot of people in this room, the letters SW. And it was because the ride was going to be called the Secret Weapon. It wasn't that it was some kind of Alton Towers secret weapon in the trade. The ride was going to be called the Secret Weapon. When I actually got out to Utah to ride the prototype, it was unbelievably boring, very cumbersome, very slow, and not the right ride for us. So it was back to the drawing board. And then I heard that two of the ex-employees of Giovanola, who had done a couple of stand-up coasters with Intamin, had branched out on their own, and under considerable cloak of secrecy were actually trying to produce an inverted roller coaster that ran below the track that did inversions, and that they were going to produce the first one for Six Flags in Chicago. I got in touch with Harold Hudson, who was Vice President of Engineering of Six Flags, and I said, Harold, is it true that you are about to produce, with Bolliger and Maillard, a roller coaster that actually runs beneath the track that turns upside down? And he said, yes. He was a bit wary. He wouldn't really admit it straight away. He said, I'll contact B&M and agree that you can talk to them about it. There was a bit of mutual back-scratching because Six Flags were interested in a couple of things that we had done, and so it was agreed that we would help them out on something else. So I got in touch with B&M in Switzerland, and they at first refused to talk to me. They contacted Harold Hudson and verified that he'd given me the okay, and then I went over and met them. They gave me the dynamics of the ride, which enabled me to produce a rough layout. And it was very, very obvious that in order to get a ride of reasonable length, if we put the station at ground level and just went up to treetop level, it wouldn't give us enough energy to get a decent long ride. So it was necessary to dig a hole. Now, you asked about Mr. Stengel. Herr Stengel was a German engineer who had pioneered, in the very early days of computer software, a clever piece of software for German autobahns to allow them to calculate the angle of banking of motorway slip roads as they weave around, working out the rough angle of bank according to the speed of the traffic. And Intamin got in touch with him. This is going back an awful long time. And prior to that, Schwarzkopf got in touch with him and said, could you do the calculations for, I think it was a Jumbo Jet or a Jetstar that they were producing. And he did. And from then on, the firm of Stengel actually are behind the the mathematics and the dynamics of hundreds of roller coasters around the world, not just for B&M or for Intamin, but for nearly all the major manufacturers, Gerstlauer, the American manufacturers, people like Premier and so on. So B&M farm out the actual calculations for the rides to Stengel, and he charges them a lot of money to produce the necessary calculations, but they have produced the best rides in the world. Now you asked how I fit in. The difference between most of the parks and the Tussauds group, Tussauds, Disney and Universal took a different approach to ride development to almost anyone else. Most of the other parks, including Six Flags, would go to the IAAPA convention, which is the trade association in America, and simply say to the manufacturers, we have got a site, we have got a budget of X million dollars, this is the plan of the site, we want the biggest, highest, fastest, tallest, whatever, will you design it for us? And the only creative input that the park would have would be to come up with a silly name and work out what colour it was going to be painted. It was as simple as that. Now, Disney never took this approach, neither did Universal, and because of Tussauds and the fact that they were based in the entertainment industry, and my roots were within the entertainment industry, we didn't want to go down that route either. And so what tended to happen, and this was certainly the case with Nemesis and Oblivion, and slightly less with Air, was I would come up with an idea, I would work out roughly what might be practical, I would know enough about the dynamics of the ride to be able to come up with a layout and get an indication as to how much track we could get in for a given lift height, and have an idea of the kind of way we would want to present it, whether it would be a very intimidating ride, whether it would be a battling ride, or whatever. And only then would we go to the manufacturers with actual layouts, with suggested layouts, and allow them to then come back with proposals. So this was the big difference. So in the case of Nemesis, once B&M had given me the basic criteria of what a ride was capable of doing, roughly the amount of lift energy that was required for a given amount of track, the kind of turning radii that a ride could achieve, the amount of transition you need between the various elements, then I came up with a layout based on the top of the Nemesis lift being next to the highest existing tree on site. And it was as simple as that. And then working back from that, we positioned the ride station, not down in the bottom of a hole. As you probably appreciate, a well-designed roller coaster saves some of its thrills to the end. A badly designed roller coaster peters out at the end. Now, of course, this breaks the laws of physics, because normally a roller coaster, you go up high, and the first drop is the big one, and it goes up and down and gets progressively closer and closer to the ground and peters out towards the end. So, a badly designed ride breaks the laws of showmanship. The laws of showmanship, when you think about it, the best films keep the best till last. You get the big finale. Whereas roller coasters don't tend to do that. And I was adamant that I wanted an inversion in Nemesis just before the station. Now that meant, of course, not putting the station at the very bottom of the ride, but about a third of the way up, so that you still had some energy below the station in order to achieve that inversion. So it started to come together. And then, and I can actually see the window. If you look out, you can see a light on in a window over there. That used to be Nick Varney's office. Nick was, and there is a name for you. Nick used to be marketing director here at Alton Towers and worked with me on Nemesis. And we were coming up with ideas for themes and names. Now, when we looked at the structure and the track and the vehicles, the track itself was quite sinuous and serpentine, and I suggested the idea that we would have a backstory, not necessarily a story that would be used to promote the ride, but a backstory that would tie all the creatives together, that we were excavating a giant hole in the ground for another ride, and we had uncovered these tentacles from this sinister creature. And the idea that Nemesis was some sort of monster, underground monster, came out. And it was in that office over there where the name Nemesis came out. And anyone that's read my book will know the story behind how we came up with the name. We were getting absolutely nowhere with the name. And the deadline for the marketing, the advertising, and so on was approaching. And he said, we've got to come up with a name. And he grabbed me, pulled me into that very office and said, we're not leaving this office until we've come up with a name. And thanks to a bottle of Southern Comfort, which is happy to be on the shelf, which lubricated our creative juices, the name Nemesis came up, and that the rest is history, really. So that was Nemesis, and the way B&M and Stengel fitted in with Nemesis. Now, B&M, as you probably know, are a very low-key organisation. They operate from very sort of humble premises, beautiful premises, but very humble premises. They don't really advertise. They are the most expensive roller coaster manufacturer in the world. If you think of a comparable sort of product range, such as motor cars, you know, you've got your Ferraris and Lamborghinis at the top, and then you work your way down through all the other manufacturers. Well, B&M really are up at the top. They are the most expensive. They are the best by a long way. And when Nemesis opened, it was very obvious we had got ourselves a beautiful piece of machinery. It was running well. They were delightful people to deal with, easy to liaise with, and we decided that the next big ride would be a B&M ride. And so we built Oblivion, and then subsequently Air, and we built Nemesis Inferno, and we built a big ride at Dragon Khan at PortAventura, and so on. So I hope that answers your question as to how I fit in with B&M and with Stengel.
Next question. Oh, but yeah, no. Go ahead.
What is your favourite ride that you've been on?
I think it has to be Big Thunder Railroad, and the reason is I think of myself as an entertainer. I want people to have fun and have a good time, and roller coasters are quite intimidating things. There are an awful lot of people that come to theme parks that are scared, terrified, and don't ride them. And I always stand and watch one of my rides and look at the people that are standing, thinking, I wish I had the courage to go on it. And I feel for those people, because as an entertainer, you want to entertain as broad a spectrum of people as possible. And when I first saw Big Thunder Mountain Railroad at Disneyland, I thought, this is very clever, because it's a roller coaster, but an awful lot of people that go on it don't even realise it's a roller coaster. If you stripped it of its theming, if you took away the mountain and the cute little train and the wacky sort of scenery, and you stripped it, it would look like a roller coaster, and an awful lot of people would be frightened to go on it. But because it looks non-threatening, it entertains a far broader spectrum of people. So I blatantly copied Big Thunder Railroad when we built the first runaway train at Chessington. We couldn't afford $40 million In fact, the runaway train at Chessington, our budget was, I think, something like £650,000. And that meant we had to take a standard Mack Blauensian and put a great big foam mountain over it and disguise the layout. And we disguised the layout so well that Herr Mack, who was head of the Mack company, when he saw the model, and I built a working model of it, he looked at it and he said, "Oh yeah, but this is wrong. You've bought a standard ride from us. This isn't a standard layout." And I said, "It is. You kind of work out where the train is going." And it even fooled him. So I'm not ashamed to admit that we did copy the concept of Big Thunder Mountain on a fraction of the scale. And then, of course, we put the runaway train in here. But that concept of taking away the intimidation of a roller coaster and making it fun for the whole family, while still be able to give thrills, and that's the important thing. Anyone can build a soft little ride that entertains little kiddies, but is no match for the teenagers and the people who want a harder ride. But Big Thunder Railroad entertains everybody, and that's what show business is all about. So that's my favourite ride.
Okay, next question.
What do you consider to be the best dark ride in the world?
This will surprise you. The Haunted Mansion at Knoebels Grove. Now, who's heard of Knoebels Grove? Right, who's not heard of Knoebels Grove? Yes, that says it all. Knoebels Grove is this wacky family-run theme park in Pennsylvania, run by a delightful guy called Dick Knoebel, who is an absolutely off-the-wall character. Everything is done in-house. They build everything themselves, and they built a dark ride called the Haunted Mansion. It was done extremely cheaply. It is the epitome of everything a good dark ride ought to be. And I think that the Haunted Mansion at Knoebels Grove is arguably the best. It's the one that tends to win the National Amusement Park Historical Association Dark Ride of the Year award. And I was thrilled to discover that the original Bubbleworks at Chessington used to come second in their poll, and the Pirates of the Caribbean used to come third. Now, unfortunately, the Bubbleworks at Chessington is no longer the Bubbleworks that was originally designed. But for an American outfit like the National Amusement Park Association to put an English dark ride in their way up at the top of their charts, I always felt was quite an honour. But it certainly was well beaten by Dick's Haunted Mansion. And I walked around that ride quite a few times and with the lights on. It's incredibly crudely made, but when I ride it, it still makes me jump. So it's a very, very clever ride. Yeah.
The next question. We've got one down the front here.
Hi. My daughter wants to know, do you still get scared when you go on the rides?
I don't get scared if I get on a ride from a manufacturer that I trust. I think if I went to China or India, or maybe even Russia, I might be a little bit scared. But no, I don't get scared on rides, and I can't ride roller coasters like I used to. You know, if any of you have seen any of the YouTube videos of the opening of Nemesis, I mean, we were very naughty on the opening of Nemesis. We sort of sold the first ride, unique ride, first ever ride, to about 5 different companies who all thought they were getting the first ride. So I had to ride Nemesis. Blue Peter had the first ever ride. So did Tomorrow's World. So did ITV local news up here. There were a load of first rides, and I used to have to go around making out I'd never ridden it before. So if you look on YouTube, you'll see all these first rides with me, as if I've never ever ridden it before. In fact, I probably probably ridden it 50 or 60 times, if the truth's known. The opening of Nemesis was quite an experience, and I had to ride it dozens and dozens of times without a break, and it didn't used to affect me, but I can't do it anymore now, to be perfectly honest. I end up with a splitting headache, irrespective of how well designed a ride is. After about 5 or 6 rides on the trot, I've got a splitting headache.
We had a question over here. There we go. We've got a team member.
With the likes of Port Ventura and even Disney and whatnot being so close, obviously, in terms of flights, how can the UK up its game, and especially with Paramount knocking on our doorstep as well now, how can the likes of Alton Towers, Thorpe Park up their game and compete with those types of investments?
Well, look, the one thing that Alton Towers has got going for it is its natural setting. We don't need to plant mature trees, we don't need to build fiberglass castles. The place is essentially a very pleasant place to be in, whereas as soon as you build a theme park from scratch, a huge amount of the budget has to go into landscaping and making a nice place, even before you build any rides or shows or other attractions. So Alton Towers, because of its setting, because of its environment, does mean that every penny that it devotes to a new ride development can go on that, rather than a lot of infrastructure and landscaping around it. Although having said that, the amount of money that is spent here on landscape is huge. And if we do fell any trees for the purposes of installing a ride, then for every tree that is felled, several dozen are planted to replace. But as far as the economics are concerned, Alton Towers is obviously the brand leader in Britain. Merlin are now the second biggest attraction operators in the world and are rapidly catching up with Disney. You know, they're about to open, I think, their 100th attraction. They're colossal. Their buying power is enormous, and Alton Towers will continue to invest. You know, I'm meeting Justin, the marketing director, and Ian, the general manager, in a couple of weeks' time. I'm very flattered that although I'm retired, they've asked me to come and just generally talk to them about what the possibilities are here, and there are ideas in the pipeline. Alton Towers is not resting on its laurels. It will continue to produce the most imaginative rides, the best rides in the world. I think they did an incredible job with the Smiler. I think the Smiler is one of the most unique coasters in the world. I can't think of anybody that has really thought outside the box. It was, you know, it was one thing to come up with a layout and a profile for a ride with 14 inversions, but to then come up with that incredibly clever theme and storyline and the styling of it. You know, so you're wearing black and yellow. You know, it was very clever. With Merlin Magic Making down in London and Candy, you've got probably the best creative team in the theme park world. I was going to say outside Disney, but Disney's still designed to a formula, whereas the wonderful thing about Merlin is they don't design to a formula. And it was sheer genius coming up with the Smiler. I think the Smiler is a very, very clever ride indeed, and certainly given that it didn't have, you know, a fair crack of the whip last season, in as much as it didn't operate for a whole year. This will be its first full operating year. It performed remarkably well in terms of pulling in the visitors. So I think Alton Towers certainly will continue to produce the best rides in the country. And when it comes to talk of all these other new parks, when you consider that for the last 30 years, there have been talk of the different American park chains coming to Britain and riding roughshod over all the existing brands, and it just doesn't happen, because as soon as they really sit down and do their marketing, they discover that they're going to have to put so much money into infrastructure before they even put a piece of concrete in the ground for a ride, that it no longer becomes viable. So, Alton Towers has got such an amazing site here, but dreadful access, as you well know. When we have visitors from abroad come to Alton Towers, they assume that there will be some sort of 5-lane motorway come straight to our place. And they're meandering through the Staffordshire countryside, getting lost, thinking that you can't believe that this place gets nearly 3 million visitors a year. But apart from the access, Alton Towers has got it all. It doesn't need a fiberglass castle. We've got a wonderful centrepiece to the park. So I think all of you loyal, faithful Alton Towers enthusiasts will continue to enjoy Alton Towers being the brand leader for many, many years to come. And you don't need to worry about Paramount and all those kind of people.
So the Smiler Man. What do you believe the future of roller coasters are, like the technology, and where do you believe they're going?
That's the most difficult question. When we were first looking around for the next ride after 13, Mark Fisher at Merlin was saying, we've got to be innovative, we've got to do something different. And he then came up with threw in all sorts of ideas, like roller coasters that consisted of balls that rolled along tracks, and all sorts of wacky things. And good show business is not all about necessarily mechanical gimmicks. It's all about heart and soul. And I firmly believe that we would be able to, with the vast amount of talent in terms of the creative talent and the marketing talent, and I think the Smiler illustrates just how clever the marketing department here at Alton Towers are, coordinating everything through from the branded merchandise, and the Smiler shop is one of the cleverest branded merchandise shops in any theme park in the world. Right the way through with the advertising campaigns and the below-the-line media advertising and so on. So you've got an amazing creative resource in Merlin, and I believe that they would be able to take a fairly standard piece of roller coaster hardware and do something absolutely amazing with it. And I think that is something that you may well see in a few years' time. So it doesn't necessarily need different mechanical gimmicks. And often when you set out to do the world's first, using some kind of gimmick mechanism or mechanical gimmick, it can often backfire. I'll always remember going back about 30 years when the first stand-up coaster was proposed. Everyone got terribly excited about stand-up coasters. Now, I've never been that enamoured with them. They really don't live up to people's expectations. You're trussed up to a pole like a chicken. You don't feel really particularly vulnerable. You might as well be comfortably sat down and enjoying the ride ahead. But it was a mechanical gimmick for the sake of a mechanical gimmick. People could have said the same about Nemesis, but I felt that the whole thing of having your feet dangling was not a gimmick for a gimmick's sake. It really would add to the thrill of the ride. And the same with the free-fall element on Oblivion and the pause at the top. And then, of course, air. Now, that too was a world's first mechanically. All right, Vekoma had a bash at doing it and hadn't really succeeded. They hadn't cracked it. But air, I think, is a lovely sensation. We deliberately marketed air not as intimidating, not as the villain, but as the hero. And it's surprising, an awful lot of people who pluck up the courage to ride air who wouldn't normally ride it come off saying that was really pleasant, that was fun, that was different. So those are world's first mechanical gimmicks, if you like, that have ended up in very successful products. Now with the Smiler, we really were kind of going down a lot of blind alleys, coming up with some kind of gimmick. And eventually it was decided that we would build a record-breaking number of inversions in a ride, and that would be the marketing gimmick. Now, as you well know, that gimmick is, if you like, just used as a handle for marketing a ride. It's a way of saying this is not just any old roller coaster. So it is important to have that USP, unique selling point. And Nick Varney always insists that every proposal that is put to the Merlin board have got to fulfil two criteria. One is that there should be what he calls a killer image. In other words, one photograph which you could show anybody, knows nothing whatsoever about it, you don't say anything, you show them that photograph and they should go, wow, that looks amazing. So that's one thing. And then the other is some kind of short descriptive sentence that sums up what that ride is. That is where to be able to say it's got more inversions than any other roller coaster in the world, or it is the highest in the world, or it is the fastest, is a necessity, unfortunately. Now, when it came to 13, we said, yes, this is a world's first, but we're not telling you what it is. And that worked extremely well, in as much as people had to go on it in order to find out. And they knew that if Alton Towers said there was something unique about it, then there really was. But in the case of 13, it was decided that unique selling point would be the highest number of inversions in the world. And we decided that if we were going to break the record, there was no point in breaking it by 1 or 2, because the chances were someone else around the world was going to build a 12 or 13 inversion coaster, so we would go the whole way and do 14. And my goodness, was it a struggle to actually come up with a layout and a profile on the old black hole site, which was very restricted, without going up above treetop height. For those of you that know how we test it with the helium balloons, basically we get a load of red balloons filled with helium on lengths of string, and Andy Nichols, our landscape architect, wanders around the locality with his camera and a mobile phone, and we go around the site sending up these balloons, and he says up a bit, down a bit, until he can no longer see the balloon. And then we know exactly where the high points of the ride can be on the ground, and we then measure the length of string and we know how high it is. And that's the way we do it. It's as simple as that. And it was incredibly difficult coming up with that layout. We had a good relationship with Gerstlauer. We did the Sora course at Thorpe Park, so they'd given me all the dynamics of the ride. It was very obvious we were going to need to have 2 lifts. One, we thought we'd rather have 2 identical lifts. We'd have one vertical and one incline lift in order to get a reasonable amount of track. That then allowed, and I was thrilled today to see that they're actually dueling the ride quite nicely. It was designed so that you would dispatch the trains, and both trains, if you dispatched at the right interval, would be climbing the lifts together, and therefore would duel around through the circuit. And I was very pleased today to see that they were doing that. But it was a difficult ride to produce, but it wasn't a mechanical gimmick for the sake of it. But as far as what the future holds, well, I mean, if you go faster and faster, now they're having to put visors and windshields on these things, because if you're going at 150 miles an hour on a coaster and a little bee or fly is kind of buzzing along in front of you and you hit it and it goes in your eye, it'll blind you. So these faster and faster roller coasters, the problems that they're having with them, it's not so much the mechanics, the bearings and the wheels can handle it, but you know, there really is a limit to how fast. And for those of you that have ridden the really high rides in the States, I'm not sure that these very high rides are necessarily the best rides in the world. Some of the best rides in the world, I believe, aren't necessarily record breakers. So as far as where things are going, I think it's that the future is in designers using their imagination, thinking outside the box, and doing more things like the Smiler, in actual fact, rather than gimmick technology.
Where did you get the idea of the theming of the Smiler and the track layout?
Well, I have to admit, I didn't really have anything to do with the theming of the Smiler. As far as the track layout was concerned, how many of you are familiar with No Limits? And who is now adept at using No Limits 2? Yes, it takes a bit of doing, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Well, No Limits, for those of you that don't know what it is a very, very neat computer program which anyone can get on the internet, which enables you to design roller coasters, and very, very realistic. And the new version, No Limits 2, is stunningly realistic. I started using No Limits almost as soon as it came out. I was involved in the creation of it in the early days. And so I basically doodled with a site plan. Even before No Limits 2, there was a trick to actually taking an image of your site plan and superimposing it on the No Limits base, and you could then trace it. And I basically doodled, and with the balloon tests we worked out where the high points could be, which had to be up at the toilet's end, which was where the best cover was, and the balloons had shown us that. So the two lifts had to be at that end, the two high points had to be up there, and the station down at the bottom end. And I basically came up with a rough layout. That was then sent to Gerstlauer. Well, the rough layout that I came up with was using the data that I had on doing SAW. I decided that we would replicate the inversion out of the station that we put into SAW, because again it comes as a nice surprise. You know, most people assume when you get on a roller coaster that it would just trundles the base of the lift and go up the lift, and then it will all start happening. And the idea of putting the station a few metres up in the air has two benefits. It means you can do something fun before you get to the lift, and it also means that you can do something fun at the very end of the ride and dissipate your energy going back up into the station. So I thought, well, it's worked well with SAW, so we'll do that. Then the layout started to come together, and that was then sent to Gerstlauer as a No Limits file, and Gerstlauer then started to modify it, and we have the ride we have today. But as far as the theme and the name, by this time I had officially retired. So it was a case of Candy Holland and the boys and girls down in London liaising with the marketing people up here, and Justin had just been taken on, who I realised as soon as he arrived was a very, very smart guy. And my justification was within a couple of months of him arriving as marketing director here at Alton Towers. He'd been poached by head office, who seconded him several days a week to actually do group work as well. So he and Candy and the teams here and down in London came up with the name and the theme, and I think they've done an incredible job.
Hi, John. You've spoken about 2 rides that you say are very good, but have been done on a very, very low budget. So that suggests that the design had to come in because the budget was so low. So when you're designing a ride, do you go, this is the budget, design a ride, or do you design the ride and produce a budget? And do you think that having a smaller budget is probably not necessarily a bad thing in reality, because it creates more imagination?
Yeah, that's a brilliant question.
I mean, the restrictions that are put upon us have forced us to do things in a different way. Now, I don't know what the price to come into Alton Towers is this year, I don't know how much you pay, but when you consider that it now costs, I think that a one-day ticket into Disneyland is over $100. You know, it's megabucks. There's no way that Alton Towers can charge that kind of money. If we could, then we would be able to build rides with 30, 40 million pound budgets. We've always had budgets far higher than other parks in Britain, but not on the same scale as the American parks, or some of the American parks, or the budgets that some of the American parks claim. Because I do know for a fact that some of the parks will say they're building a $30 million roller coaster, whereas in actual fact it's a $15 million roller coaster. The restrictions of budget, I mean, we've always had good, sensible budgets. And the first call on the money is always, without a shadow of doubt, safety. To build the best possible, safest piece of machinery that money can buy. And the rides here at Alton Towers are a credit to the manufacturers and to Terry Dunn and his team maintaining them. The amount of work that goes into maintaining these rides and monitoring them is incredible. So the first call on the budget is always safety, which is why we have always bought from the very best manufacturers. And there are a load of manufacturers in Britain, not very many. On the continent, quite a lot. In America, a huge number. And in the Far East, a gigantic number. And to be perfectly honest, I wouldn't touch any of the Far Eastern manufacturers with a barge pole. I don't mind going on record as saying that as well. But so safety has got to be first priority, and all the rides here at Alton Towers are superb pieces of engineering, real quality engineering, the best that money can buy. But then when it comes to the other elements of the theming and landscaping and so on, that is where we have to stretch the budget as far as it will go and think outside the box. Now, one theme that is relatively cheap to do is sort of rusty destruction, and that sort of Nemesis, any kind of theming that looks a little bit decrepit is relatively cheap to maintain. Whereas as soon as you do something that's got to be smart and slick, such as air, when we came to do air, which has to be really crisp and smart, and the same with the Smiler, that is much more expensive. Now the Smiler's theming budget with all the video displays and all that sort of thing was very high indeed. But it's credit to the studios that they are able to do far more with their theming budgets than well, certainly the Americans. If you gave Disney our theming budgets, they'd probably that would just about cover decorating the interior of their shop. So you know, it's credit due to our designers that they are able to make it go first. But in answer to your question, is it the ride comes first and then you work out the budget? And the answer is no. Around the Merlion Group, there are capital allocations made to the different parks, And so Alton Towers will know that in such and such a year, maybe 3 years ahead or whatever, they have got a capital budget of X million pounds. And that is the starting point. That is the budget. And then you get other starting points, such as the huge problem of getting planning consent here at Alton Towers. So we've got to look around the site, work out where on the site we could put something, what we might have to take out in order to put it in. That the site might dictate whether it could be a high ride or a flat ride or whatever. So you've got that as another influencing factor which comes in. And then you've got the marketing people saying, well, we now want a family attraction, or we want a very intimidating teenage attraction, or we want a young kiddie attraction, or whatever. So there are lots and lots of things. So although the budget is the starting point, then there are lots of other balls that are thrown in and have to be juggled in order to eventually come up with the final project. Does that answer the question? Good.
Okay, we have a question from our forum. Basically, the park in its current state, with the rides that you have, the attractions that are around here, whereabouts in the park would you envisage future coasters, future projects, future rides being placed? Because there's a huge site, but it does seem like running out of room to a certain extent.
There are still opportunities, but there's a vast amount of land here in Alton Towers that we would still be able to put rides in if we got planning consent. So really, it's not a case of me answering this question, but you're asking the planners at Alton Tower, at Staffordshire Moorlands. We have, over the years, designed a huge number of rides that have never gone ahead simply because of planning. Literally, I have on file dozens of rides, and still do, and now it's a case of if Alton Towers want to pull any of those out of the filing cabinet and revisit them and take them to the planners again. But there are opportunities, but it's a massive negotiation task with the local planners.
One, I'm dying to ask a question over here.
Hi. If you rewind 20 years before kind of Nemesis and Air and 13, if, say, imagine Alton Towers didn't have the height restrictions that it has, how would these rides look today? It's more of like a fantasy question.
I really don't know. I mean, it's an interesting question, but such a hypothetical question. I don't know is the answer. It's happened the way it's happened. Thanks to, first of all, to Swords being very, very positive in their attitude towards developing theme park attractions after we did Chessington. When we opened Chessington, within a few months, Lord Blakenham said to Michael Herbert, we've got to be the brand leader, so you better start expanding Chessington. And it was very obvious we couldn't expand Chessington, and that's why we went on the hunt for another park to either build or acquire. We acquired Alton Towers. We've been very fortunate in as much as we were owned first by to Swords, and then obviously there was an interim period where the bankers were involved, and then subsequently Merlin, when the ethic of show business came back into it. When the money men were in control here, the showbiz ethic disappeared, to be perfectly honest, and it was just money, money, money. But then when Merlin came back on board, given that Merlin was headed by a guy who started here at Alton Towers, I knew that Alton Towers and our theme parks were safe. They were back in safe hands. And Nick and the team down at Poole have really proved that. So thanks to the people that have backed us and have shown confidence in myself and latterly a lot of other people here, we've built what we have. And I don't know what else we'd have done. I mean, if we'd had no height restrictions, because Geoffrey was building the big one at Blackpool, there is no way we would have just built a massive great high ride. If we had gone for that and we'd gone to B&M, it would have cost us nearly twice what Blackpool paid Arrow for the big one. And I'm not sure it would have been that great a ride. I had an opportunity to have a bash at a big high ride with Dragon Khan, of course. Doing that with B&M was great fun. But I'm not sure that a Dragon Khan here, it certainly wouldn't be appropriate to the park. The locals wouldn't like it. It would be an awful lot on the landscape. So, you know, what we've done is the right, with the benefit of hindsight. You know, I think I wouldn't change a thing, really. Sorry that I can't answer your question in a more spectacular way.
Do you ever take any memorabilia home from like rides that have been decommissioned or anything? Or just, I don't know, little parts of the track or anything? Have you got anything personal home? And if you do, which is like which means the most to you?
No, I don't actually, and I'm very bad at taking photographs and photographic records. So, although because we've just moved house and I'm turning out the old attic, and there are all the records of all the projects that we've done, going way back to the early days of Chessington, and all the projects here and at the other parks, Thorpe Park and Portaventura and Hyde Park. Other than paper records, I haven't got any memorabilia at all. I know on the last day of the corkscrew's operation, everybody descended on the corkscrew and took nuts and bolts and wheels, and people said to me, well, don't you want bits of it? And I said, well, no, you know, the corkscrew is in the past. So I have to say, no, I do not have any memorabilia at all. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
What are your 3 best rides you've ever built?
Well, I suppose number 1 has to be Nemesis. But the ride that I always have had a big affection for it was the Stampeder at Portaventura. When we decided that we wanted to build a Woody at Portaventura, I wanted it to be different and to be special, not for the sake of being different and special. And I've always loved the Grand National at Blackpool, and the idea of a racing ride adds that specialness. But then I wanted something that was unique, not for the sake of it, but that really added to the fun. Now, how many of you have ridden a Stampeder at Portaventura? Okay, so you will know that halfway round the ride, the 2 racing trains that are probably more or less neck and neck go into a tunnel. And when they emerge from that tunnel, whichever train you're on, you've got the other track next to you, but you can't see the other train. It's obviously either behind or ahead. And then, about 5 seconds later, the other train comes straight at you in the opposite direction. Now, this had never been done before. It was very difficult to achieve, and it really did add something. Now, I'm told that they don't always race that ride. They actually dispatch the trains now at random, which completely defeats the whole object. But that layout, combined with putting the kiddie track in, the Tomahawk, which, if the operators of the Tomahawk do it right, they ensure that the kiddies win the race, actually, which is rather nice at the end. That to me was the most fun ride, providing it's operated properly. So I suppose Nemesis is number 1. Number 2 has got to be probably the Stampeder. And then I suppose Megaphobia. You know, that's not a Merlin or a Tussauds ride, but Megaphobia at Oakwood was a great ride. It still is. I rode it I wrote it at the end of last season, and it's running like the clappers, and it's a fun ride. So number 3, it's a bit difficult for me to work out number 3. It might work with the Smiler actually. I think the Smiler it's all come together in this one. I think it's a brilliant ride. So I'll say Judgment on number 3 actually, but number 1 is Nemesis. Yeah.
Aside from the roller coasters that you worked on, what are your favourite dark rides? What are you most proud of?
Well, I think the dark ride I'm most proud of was the Bubble Works at Chessington. The Bubble Works was a great fun ride, and it was a shame that commercial pressures caused them to change it at the will of the sponsor. But the Bubble Works was my favourite dark ride, I think. I don't suppose many of you actually ever rode the original Bubble Works. You did? Oh, right. Yeah. Yes, it was a lovely ride. So as far as dark rides are concerned, the dark rides that I've done, the Bubble Works definitely tops it. And then I think of other people's dark rides, the Fata Morgana ride at Diefteling is probably the most accomplished dark ride. It's not the biggest, not the most expensive, but it's a truly beautiful ride. But dark rides, I mean, it was a sad day when it was decided that we had to turn the Haunted House into a shoot-'em-up ride. As soon as you turn the dark ride into a shoot-'em-up ride, the whole atmosphere goes. The spooky atmosphere disappears, and people are just concentrating on firing at little red spots of light in the dark. So the Haunted House was a good fun ride to build, and apart from the infamous official opening, which is well documented in the book, which was an absolute nightmare, one of the worst days of my life. Once we got that opening day over with, the Haunted House settled down and had a very, very successful few years. Now, the Haunted House, it was actually designed that every year a new effect would be put in to refresh it. And that never, ever happened. The Haunted House did not change for many, many years. And so, obviously, there was no novelty to it. But that was the intention, that we would put one new effect in every year to refresh it, and that never happened. And then, of course, it had to change, and that's when the major refurbishment took place. But dark rides, they're tricky. They're what we call hole-in-the-wall attractions, which are difficult to promote because to get that killer image that Nick Varney dictates of a dark ride is not easy. To produce a photograph that you can show someone and they go, wow, that is amazing. I mean, as far as dark rides in the world, the Spider-Man dark ride at Universal just sort of moved everyone into another league, and that was an amazing ride, very high-tech, but at the same time outrageously expensive. Something that other parks couldn't afford to do. I think, dark rides have always got a place in parks, whether you create your own intellectual property or you license in an intellectual property. And now, Merlin, with the size they are, they're able to acquire intellectual properties like Shrek and CBeebies and so on. And so, these sorts of rides will be appearing at the Merlin parks.
I'm going to go to the back here.
How long a shelf life do you think Nemesis has got? Because I'm desperate for my son to ride it. He's only 16 months.
Well, before I answer that question, for those of you who don't know Natalie and Nick back, Nick is the author of the other book, which is the Tales of the Towers, which is a fabulous book. It has told stories that even I didn't know about Alton Towers. And if you are Alton Towers enthusiast and you haven't read it, then shame on you, because it's a fabulous book. So Nick is the author of that, and it makes wonderful reading. So to answer your question, Natalie, Nemesis is a beautifully designed piece of machinery which will be able to go on forever. If a piece of track ever becomes worn, it can be replaced. If the trains become old, they can be replaced. As long as our visitors want to ride Nemesis, Alton Towers will keep Nemesis. As soon as the visitors think Nemesis is old hat and other rides have usurped it, then Nemesis will probably disappear. But I don't think that will be happening for many years, and I hope your little son is able to ride it. And I would be honoured to take him on it when he's older.
Looking back, I think we can all recognise how important Nemesis has been in Alton Towers' history. Was there a particular moment for you when you thought, we've cracked it, this is the one?
Yeah, it happened on opening day. I suppose, because of my background in the theatre and in live entertainment, actually seeing the way a piece of entertainment is functioning is very important to me. You know, other people can design a ride, for example, and never even see it, let alone see it operating, and whether people enjoy it or not is not important to them, as long as it brings in the money. Now, when we opened Nemesis, we had a few previews, mainly for staff, but only staff, and that isn't really a good test of whether something's going to be a success or not. Staff tend to be quite jaded, really, and they've seen the thing being built and they know what it's all about. We did something unique actually with Nemesis, with the crew that we employed. We did not want them to be in any way jaded by other operations at Alton Towers. So we recruited a brand new team of operators, and they didn't know actually what they were being interviewed for or what the ride was. All they were told was that they were going to be in charge of the most fantastic ride in the world. And we didn't let them see it, and I thought it was very, very important that they should get their first glimpse of Nemesis as the visitors see it, not as a building site. So they were recruited, and there used to be a staff training room in the farm down there. And what we did was we assembled them all down there, and we got the maintenance department to run up the ride and get it running. And we took them over, and their first glimpse of Nemesis was as you see it. And we put them on it, and they couldn't believe what had happened to them. It was amazing. And I think it's very important that people that work in the entertainment business should be able to experience entertainment as the audience see them, not get their first view backstage, so to speak. But on opening day, the word had got out that there was something incredible at Alton Towers. The teaser campaign that Nick Varney had created that was going on television, it wasn't computer generated because there was no such thing in those days as computer generation. It was cleverly mocked up because it was done before the ride actually was running, but it was done with a combination of models and so on. And it really was a very, very clever teaser. So people in Britain knew something amazing had happened at Alton Towers. Something quite sinister, something different. Whereas Blackpool took a very different approach to marketing the big one. It was just what you see is what you get. It was the tallest, fastest roller coaster in the world, or so they were saying. So people were intrigued about it. And when the turnstiles opened on opening day, there was a mass of people that just literally ran as fast as they could through the park to get to Nemesis, and this great wall of people surged towards us. And Walter Bolliger and myself were stood underneath the ride sort of out of the way on one of the footpaths as this sea of people swamped the ride. And immediately the ride, it was running to capacity within minutes. The staff really knew what they were doing, even though they'd not run it with guests, they'd only run it with staff. People were obviously loving the ride. And it was very, very apparent that we had a huge success on our hands within minutes of the ride opening. And that's when I turned around to Walter and I said, you realise we have a very, very big problem on our hands. And he looked at me very worried, very concerned, and he said, what's that? And I said, well, how the hell do we top this? So that was the challenge for the next one. But it was very obvious that we had a big, big success on our hands within minutes of Nemesis opening. And of course, the crowds that year were awful. They were just horrendous. We were I won't say awful. I mean, the director thought it was wonderful. But you know, what tends to happen is not only does everybody want that one particular ride, but they also make a beeline for it first thing in the day. So we thought we'd overestimated the amount of queuing that we'd allowed for. We'd allowed for, I think, an hour and 20 minutes queue. And it was nothing like enough. We had to literally put extra overflow queuing in and so on. And this is the problem with any new ride. And we can't expect our guests to understand or sympathise with it. But the fact is, the first year of a new ride, that's what everybody comes for. And what's more, they make a beeline for it first thing in the day. You know, if only they'd sort of hang off and go to that ride later in the day, then the queues would be less. But, well, I'm not complaining. I'm happy to go on all night with you guys. I don't
Hey there. Obviously, you've had a demand to be creative throughout your entire career, obviously being in the entertainment and being here. Now that you're retired, do you feel that you've obviously had the demand to be creative? Do you sit down and just like, oh, I want to create something, draw something up, and then you just have a file of things that you've created now and just hand them in?
If I didn't think Alton Towers was in good hands, and that there was a bunch of very, very clever, talented people who'd picked up where I left off, then I would be very frustrated. If I thought there were no good ideas, that nothing much was happening here, then I would be frustrated. But now I can sit back and I can watch what's happening here, that there's a fantastic management team here. There are very, very clever new ideas in the pipeline. I'm very honoured that they actually consult me and talk to me about it, but I'm very happy to step back now and let others do it. I've had a very, very good time over the last 30 odd years, and I'm very happy now to let other people do it. Yeah, simple as that.
Following on from that question, it's a very similar question that I had. Is there one particular thing that during your career that you didn't do that you wish you'd done? And is there one thing that if somebody gave you a blank cheque would tempt you out of retirement?
You want me to come back to? Well, if this was the European Coaster Club or the Roller Coaster Club of Great Britain, and I gave my answer, they would probably all start cheering and jumping up and down. I do regret that I haven't been able to put a wood coaster here at Alton Towers. I do understand why we haven't, and what's more, I understand why we probably never will. But the fact is that a well-designed wooden coaster is tremendous fun. And when people ride a well-designed wooden coaster, they say that was sensational. But the trouble is, when it comes to the killer image and the unique selling point and all that sort of thing, as soon as you were to test it out on the public, which has to be done when you have a big multinational corporation with mega finance behind you, every pound or dollar that the merchant bankers invest has to be proven that it will give a return. And so when you test in market research a wooden coaster, it bombs badly, very, very badly indeed. They are considered to be old-fashioned and unsafe, and there's nothing unique about them, and why would we go to the park to ride it? As soon as you build one, and this is what happened at Oakwood, and it was credit due to the McNamara family that had the guts to do it, that it's the talking point of their, you know, the whole of their area. So I do regret that we haven't built a Woody here. I don't think we ever will, and what's more, I can understand and sympathise with all those that say no, it's not going to work, it won't work for Alton Towers. You won't get an immediate return. I think you'll get a sensational return over a span of about 10 years, but that's not the way it works nowadays. So as far as that's concerned, but then when it comes to regrets for other things, no, I think I've had a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of all the stuff I've done. As the years have gone by, my input has been diluted. Obviously, when we did, well, the original Chessington, I was more or less on my own. And then the first phase of Alton Towers before Nick Varney joined with the Runaway Train and the Haunted House, it was basically me. Then with Nemesis, we did involve John Knowles at Madame Tussauds Studios to come up with the visual aspects of Nemesis. And then gradually the studios got more and more involved in projects, and a lot of the pressure was actually taken off me from that standpoint. But I've had a tremendous amount of satisfaction out of everything I've done, and I've got no regrets at all. No.
Do you want to come back in and sit down? All right.
Of the coasters you designed but that may never got built, what would you say was your favourite?
It's the one I hope they build next.
Did you buy a job lot of the brown bomber jackets in 1990? One of the things that we all gather is we understand now there's huge teams involved in creating these rides and stuff, but obviously you're still seen as synonymous for creating these legendary coasters and such, and together with your image, you know, the bomber jacket and the rest of it, it's you. And you talk about the new people on the scene, the safe hands that are taking it over. Do you see a new person that we can be interviewing in 20, 40 years? Or are we just going to be talking about names in a team? Do you think there's going to be another, like you, as such? I mean, unique as you are, but...
Well, I suppose the reason why I've got the reputation I have, whether it's justified or not, I often think it's totally unjustified actually, is because in the early days it was just me. The original team, and again it's explained in my book, I'm not pushing the book by the way, but the original team consisted of myself and Ray Barrett, and gradually we then pulled on board Andy Nichols, the landscape architect, John Collins, who was involved in the actual advising in terms of management, and Peter Barber, who was the civil engineer. But as far as the actual entertainment product, it was all on my shoulders. So I suppose it was because of the small beginnings that I have the reputation, and as the years have gone by, that reputation gets less and less justified. And I have to say, I have found it in the last few years quite embarrassing that Alton Towers find it quite convenient to put me up as the sort of eccentric loony that comes up with these wacky ideas. And from a marketing standpoint, it works quite well because people like to put a face and a name to something and say that is the creator, particularly journalists and so on. Whereas in actual fact, the team has been getting bigger and bigger, and my input over the last couple of years has been very small indeed. And when we opened the Smiler, the very first person to ride the Smiler, I was just telling Nick this actually, was actually the ITV weather girl. It was agreed that she would be able to take the first ride. Now, whereas we pulled a real flanker on the media with Nemesis flogging the first ride to loads of people, this genuinely was. She was the first person to ride it. It got its safety dock literally minutes before they were due to go. And so Keith Workman and I were stood on the platform. This is at about 6:30 in the morning. And the director is saying, we've got to do this live weather broadcast. Either she does it on the ride or you know, that's it. So it had got its safety dock. None of us had ridden it. We knew it was safe because it had got its document. And she was put on it and she rode it and did that broadcast, and none of us had ridden the thing. And then when it came back in the station, Keith said to me, well, come on, we better get on it. And I said, well, to be perfectly honest, I don't think I should be next in the queue, because there's all these people that have been, you know, sweating away, well, not even sweating, because it was so freezing cold all through the winter. You know, these people deserve to ride it long before I do. And he said, look, you are about to be interviewed on live television in 10 minutes' time, and they're going to ask you what you think of the ride, so you better get on it. So Keith and I were the next people to ride it. But I forgot what the question is now. what was the question?
Broadly, whether we'd see someone else as synonymous
Oh,
as you.
yeah. So I used to get, or still do get, put up as being the creator. And this is totally unjustified now. It was completely justified back in the days of Nemesis and Oblivion and possibly Air, but my influence was being diluted. I've got no problems with that. I mean, that was the wonderful thing. It was a team of people who were fabulous people, great to work with them. But now, I reckon it's a bit of a myth.
Okay, we're going to wrap it up in a second, so we're going to have one more question. I may ask one myself as well.
This might be a bit of a long shot, but is there anything you can tell us about what Alton Towers or Thorpe Parker might be building next?
No.
John, do you remember the first roller coaster you went on, where it was, and roughly how old you were?
Yeah, I've got your microphone, John.
It was a ride that was built out of scaffolding, of all things, on Clacton Pier, called Steel Stella. It was literally a scaffolding framework with wood clamped to it, and well, I thought it was amazing, and that was my first ride, and I was about 4, I think. There was no such thing as height restrictions, no such, I think there might have been a grab bar on it, but certainly no proper restraints or anything, but I think that was it, yeah.
Okay, in a marketing-led world that we live in these days, you did mention a name earlier on, Justin, somebody that's coming into Alton Towers and is potentially a fantastic asset to the resort.
Yes.
With the Smiler having the gimmick of the world's first 14 looping coaster, he didn't actually use the gimmick in any of his promotions. Do you think this will lead an end to world's first and trying to beat everyone else with something spectacular and come back to building raw, awesome coasters?
Yeah. Well,
that's fascinating, because you're absolutely right. He didn't need to actually use that unique selling point, which really, I think, impressed Nick Varney, because Nick was assuming that unique selling point of the world's record-breaking number of inversions was going to be the thing that was the only thing that the marketing people could hang their hat on. And thanks to his creativity and Candy's creativity, they didn't actually need to use that USP. And I think that will teach everybody a lesson. That if you have clever enough people, creative enough people in your team, you don't have to have that unique selling point. And I think that is the way forward, really is.
Okay, so I'd like everybody just to give John a massive round of applause.